Dan, the two people who've decided to start a football podcast in the middle of a pandemic with no football. Welcome, Dan. How are you doing today?
Doing well, thanks. That's exactly us.
How have you been spending your time during quarantine?
Yeah, it's been pretty much business as usual for my family, just because we have the small children. So they're still at home with us. They're still, needing to be entertained all day. So it's pretty much business as usual for us. How about you?
Um, uh, a little bit more of the same, especially grateful that I don't have children right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Seems the two full-time jobs I'm not particularly equipped to deal with. But I've kept sane by like setting small goals to feel progress because some of the days I've started to blend together.
Good.
So I've decided I'm going to learn how to do a headstand well.
Nice. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I totally got to pick up some sort of hobby, right? Like I've started baking. How random is that? I've started baking bread, so why not?
Oh, yeah, baking is a big deal. I've gone to so many grocery stores and like the flour aisle is wiped, completely
Is it?
wiped.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just like, why is everybody okay?
I know,
So,
I know. That's so funny. Thankfully, though, where I live here, it's fairly rural, so there's lots of mountains and trails and access to get outside. So, thankfully, I've had less distractions to just keep my fitness up.
amazing. Great to hear about it. So let's talk football. What are we talking about today?
So, basically, as the world knows, football just drove itself into a complete halt a few weeks ago now, and we're just going to highlight some of the main effects that this whole pandemic has had on the greater football community across the globe, and highlight those points and try to emphasize what the future might look like for our beautiful game, and then finish off with some fun.
Amazing. Yeah. As Dan just said, yeah, we really are going through like five of the major effects that we've noticed on football from this pandemic. And as a full disclaimer, a lot of the research is specifically focused on the European game, just because it's been the easiest research for us to access, but we hope to do a broader coverage on the game around the world, of course. And of course, goes without saying that it is not the most important thing, but we love this game and we would love to talk about how it's being affected by COVID-19. With that being
Exactly.
said, the first thing that comes to mind is the money, the finances.
It's all about the money.
Always about the money. It does make the world go around, truly.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, so I noticed I was reading this article the other day in The Athletic, where I get a good amount of my news, truly, and I was reading the end figures for Premier League clubs, and I noticed that even though most clubs were reporting rises, they were pretty small. One thing, and B, they came through like the businesses, like the three main incomes were broadcast, commercial, and match day.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, like, according to this, end reports from the Premier League clubs, the top three profit makers was Spurs with like 87 million, Liverpool with 42, and Man U with 28. And the biggest losers this fiscal year have been Everton, Chelsea, and Villa. Everton being at 107 and Villa being at 69.
First of all, we got to just pause. Spurs,
I know.
87. They're doubling Liverpool, last year's Champions League winners.
Yeah, isn't
And
that absurd?
it is like it's quite astounding. And then you got Man U at 28 mil. I mean, they're all those jersey sales in around the globe. But
Yeah.
Spurs, impressive.
Yeah, really impressive. I think this I think it might be due to like a thin wage bill
Yeah.
with Spurs.
I'm sure Spurs fans would have a lot to say about that 87 mil and how they could use a player or two.
Yeah, for sure. I think with Spurs, I think they have the smallest wage bill of the big six would be my intuition. But that being said, all of these 18 clubs, except two which don't, Crystal Palace and Newcastle were not included in this report because I think there's an option for them to extend, get a little more time to get their numbers out. So we don't have their numbers for this year, but of the 18 that we have numbers for today, they only Watford reduced their wage bill this year.
Incredible.
So everyone else's numbers on how much they're paying to their staff and players completely gone up, which was a staggering number for me because this meant that 64% of clubs were spent on wages.
Amazing. They're just leaking money through wages. Yeah.
Yeah, truly. And when you think about it, like, where is this money coming from? It turns out that, of course, I knew that Premier League clubs, especially, were getting money from the
TV too.
broadcast. Yeah, but I didn't realize that it was 60%, which, again, so it's like really in and out, like in through one ear, out through the next.
It really goes to show. I mean, no one plans for this, but these are truly unprecedented times in every industry. Obviously, this is about football, but here you go. Perfect example of how broadcast it disappears. There goes their revenue. There goes their income.
Yeah, truly. Yeah, this is like a big thing. If it makes up 60% of like your revenue, you're in, you're out, like anything that like that's protected with the highest level.
Amazing.
And anything that affects it means like business is bad. And for comparison, like we all know about the money in the Premier League, but like a staggering number, at least for me, like it's always hard. I mean, I don't know, it's always more shocking when you see it quantified, but compared to the Bundesliga and La Liga, there were 2 billion clear in expectation of like broadcast money. So the Premier League was expecting something like 5.25 billion. And like the next one down was 3 point something. So they really are like earning 2 billion more than the next top.
They are the giants.
League.
They are the true giants of world football in that sense of broadcast. It's
Yeah.
incredible.
So with this broadcast money particularly under threat, and the number here to note is that if the season was null and void, they would owe broadcasters about 762 million of the money, of the broadcast money, which none of the clubs understandably want to pay back. So, which leads us to what should happen to the season. If they want to recoup this money, what should happen to the season, Dan?
Exactly. Yeah. So, as we all know, there was a trickle down effect. You know, one league postponed their season for a couple of weeks. Next thing you know, it was just this domino effect across Europe. It started to spread around the world. I know where we live here in Canada and USA, MLS followed suit shortly thereafter. We saw in the Canadian Premier League not long after that. Probably the Liga MX was the last major league, at least here in North America, to follow suit. I think Aglo, they were the last ones. I think it was just about a week or two after.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Suffice to say, we have now all these leagues that had progressed at different points in the season. Various league structures as well. Not all leagues are designed like, for example, the English Premier League with a home and away schedule. Some leagues have playoff implications, other have promotion, relegation implications. So there's a lot riding on these leagues. Of course, many people's eyes are on the English Premier League, who's eventually going to be crowned the title holders. So FIFA recently announced an indefinite extension to the 2019-2020 seasons across the globe, basically allowing each country to determine how they're going to finish their campaigns. So here we are, April 14th, 2020. We don't know what it's going to look like tomorrow. Everything's changing every day. But what do you think about this, Glo? What do you think about this idea of FIFA to just kind of allow each country to decide how they're going to finish the season?
I think it is the most diplomatic approach that FIFA can take. And from my understanding, a lot of the top leagues anyway seem to be in consensus that the primary priority is to finish the season in any way that they can. So I think this is FIFA really backing that position from the thing. But of course, like any sort of like decision or endorsement from FIFA, this really comes with like a trickle down effect and a number of unanswered questions. And one that I can think of the top of my head is what is going to happen to the summer transfer window.
Exactly. So, and it just goes to show how much this is the world's game. Because, for example, the NBA, I remember that first NBA player contracted the virus and it was suspended. But really, it's kind of an in-house league. It doesn't stretch beyond their own league's borders. Whereas with Champions League, with all these international tournaments, with player movements and contracts finishing in the summer and free agency, all these things, it just becomes a huge issue that stretches beyond any country's borders. So we have, for example, already Belgium, the Belgian league has decided they're going to just terminate the season. And that's how they chose to deal with it. And okay, some might say, well, it's not one of the major country leagues from Europe, but nonetheless, it does have a trickle-down effect as the other countries around them say, okay, well, Belgium decided to deal with it this way. Well, then how are we going to deal with it?
Yeah, for sure. I think the Belgian league, especially, what was really interesting about that one that I noted was that the reason why they're able to do this, they also get TV money, but the way their contracts are written, they have this thing called force majeure clause, which a lot of the other contracts don't have. This would allow in times, so what the clause does is that in the times of unprecedented events, such as a pandemic, the insurance so the insurance can pay out to the TV. So that way, like the leagues and the clubs are not support. They don't have to pay the money back. And I think this is what is encouraging for them. But like in many other leagues, this is not an option for clubs that are relying on that TV money. So that's why they are suggesting even ideas like, let's play this league abroad. Let's play this in China. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, see, that's an interesting one too, because now you're going to be, they have all the travel implications and whatnot. Just looking at it here, actually, Glow, it's interesting to look at the table from Belgium. So we're just taking one country's league table right now, but Club Bruges were crowned champions. Ghent, who actually is a team I'm following because of Jonathan David, but suffice to say, the implications I heard in this league were big around the positions in 6th, 7th, 8th, because the point spread was only a 1 point difference. And so those were the Champions League playoffs, which of course we know provides so much money for some clubs. To get into the Champions League is huge. You can really increase your income and your revenue each season. So again, dollars and cents here, I'm looking at Anderlecht. They're going to miss out. Huge club in Belgium. Genk, another huge club. They're technically going to miss out. And they're going to be trumped by this club called Mechelen. And they're in that 6th spot. So they are in the championship playoff, which is incredible.
Yeah, truly. Yeah, there's definitely immediate like implications and ramifications on ending the season as is. I would say, full disclosure, I am a Manchester United fan. All things permitting, I would prefer the league to finish because we're 3 points. Yeah, because we're 3 points away from 4th. So there's this kind of,
there you go.
Nothing is going to feel fair. I think we should all really recognize that there's not going to be like the fairest of things on things to end. Even if it's things like playing behind closed doors, that's going to not mean as much to Liverpool's particular income. But if you're further down the table and not making as much money, those match date sales really do come in handy.
Yeah.
So yeah, even behind closed doors, which seems like the least bad option, that means something. Dan.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I agree. Go ahead.
I learned that, so this is something we need to keep track on, is because Germany, they are planning tentatively to start at the beginning of May.
Yeah, I read that too.
Yeah, I mean, honestly.
Their players aren't they already training?
Yeah, they're already training in like smaller sessions. Wow. Please, God. I mean, again, health is of the utmost importance, but please, Germany, come through. I just need some football.
Right? I know.
Desperate times.
It's interesting too, because they are one of the big, well, first of all, they're just a massive population in Germany. We have more or less 90 million people. So you have a massive country right in Central Europe there, right in the center of Europe, sorry, who are thinking about restarting. I mean, we've already seen what happened where they closed the stadium, but the fans were gathering outside the stadiums
Ah,
and
PSG fans.
right. Love our PSG, don't we?
Yeah.
So like you said. I wonder what will happen. Another thing I'm interested to know is if they continue, if they decide to, if there are leagues that decide to just continue at a later date. So let's say it technically falls into what would have been the next season. We're going to see the return of some key players from injury,
Yeah,
which
that is some good news
yeah,
there, at least. Yeah.
huge. So well, you're going to see poor Spurs with their 80 million revenue there, but they're going to see Kane return. They're going to see, for example, Rashford at your club.
Yes. Oh, so my fantasy league,
Yeah.
I'm very proud of myself because I had just like a moment of foresight, and these were like players that had been dropped. I mean, a fantasy Premier League one, but I'm
Yes.
doing the draft where none of us can have the same player.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
So,
Yes.
and obviously, I
So you
botched my
picked up
first
Kane, didn't you?
draft. This was my first year, but everyone had dropped Kane and Rashford, so I made those
Brilliant.
trades.
That is awesome. Who
So
knows?
I
You
might
could
be
be
moving up.
absolutely, yeah, those could be some legendary transfers because let's say the club or the league restarts a month, two, three down the road, and those guys are back in form. And
Yeah,
so,
that's some
yeah,
big news.
it's
Yeah.
gonna be interesting. Like even on a local level, Atlanta United, in what was it, the first or second game of the season, their star
Hmm.
player Martinez, Joseph Martinez, went down. He blew up his ACL, and so
Yeah.
he was out for the season supposedly. And as we know, the MLS is structured around your designated players, and if he could return, I mean, right there is your season back in your control.
Yeah, truly. So that is a silver lining, giving players some rest. Oh, one quick note that I wanted to make about Germany, which really does go to show you how interconnected the global politics and this pandemic and football are, is the reason why they have a giant asterisk on being able to restart at any point in May, being health. But the reason why they feel a bit more confident in this is that they have a really high testing rate, which means they are more aware of what their population
Mm-hmm.
looks like in terms of like interaction with the virus.
Mm-hmm.
And it appears they would pay a bare minimum stuff, they would have a bare minimum stuff necessity, which is something like 240 people is the bare minimum you'd need to operate a game behind closed doors.
Interesting.
So yeah, so that has been quite important to note and qualify
Mm-hmm.
Germany's intent
Kind of
to
makes
restart.
sense. It kind of makes sense that with Germany. I mean, you know, Bayer, of course, being a huge pharmaceutical organization, and they're right involved in the Bundesliga. So who knows how they're all helping get this back started again.
Yeah, you could just very
You
very
could totally see it.
organized,
Oh, so
especially when
organized.
you compare to like different leagues and different countries. It
Absolutely.
is a times night and day.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, but your mention on players really does make me want to go to and chat a bit more about our next topic of major impact, which is player contracts.
Indeed.
As we know, mostly in Europe, most player contracts are due to be terminated by uh, June 30th, and that's about 500 players.
Mm-hmm.
And as we already mentioned, FIFA does is allowing these contracts to be extended on short term. Basically, we're going to negotiate what this contract looks like in the short term. Where are you on that? Because I've heard some case being made that the integrity it has it can have a negative effect on the integrity of the game.
Well, just speaking frankly, player contracts is something that I'm already just sore about and sour about. I just finished watching Sunderland Till I Die season 2,
I am on
and
episode 4.
there you go. Full disclosure, I'm a big Sunderland fan. And we all know how much we botch our contracts, Jack Rodwell, for example. But getting, what was it, 50,000 British pounds a week in League One? It's insane. But anyway, So player contracts, what a tricky topic. I can't imagine like all the folks writing these contracts or players, lawyers, whatnot. They're all scrambling trying to figure out how to leverage this in their own interests. I mean, this is a really interesting situation, especially like we just talked about. If leagues are extended, if seasons aren't technically completed, how do you account for that when player contracts end in June? Especially if, for example, the Champions League isn't done yet, but you have players who are already locked into a club who have played in that competition, but they're switching clubs. There's just a lot of various factors that don't sync up right now.
Yeah, it seems it's been suggested that, like, obviously, if your contract ends at the end of June, clubs are less likely to like give you a 3-year contract, but perhaps like short-term deals. But even that, there is, in addition to a legal nightmare of rewriting
Right.
this contract, there's some reasons as to why players might not want to take this. I mean, if you get injured during this extended season, that is a huge risk to a player who is a free agent and is worth considering whether like the extra 5 games are worth it, what the risk of injury. And on the flip side of that, you'd have players who are already like locked in on a club, and the thinking there is, should we play like 10 back-to-back games if I already know I have a home in the future?
Exactly. I mean, where are you at with it? Would you rather see the control be in the players' hands or in the club's hands, or would you rather just see like they take it out of their hands entirely and FIFA just makes some blanket statement?
I definitely think where I land is mostly I encourage like negotiations between clubs and players.
Hmm.
For sure, I would hesitate from endorsing like a blanket statement, just because the players, there's like a diverse array of players and their needs are incredibly different, and they're more likely to be met if you and the club are negotiating. But I do think that there is a conversation that needs to be had, and that players have like a valid point of view. Whose contracts are ending have a valid point of view. My go-to for this is Willian. For some reason, this
Yes.
is stuck in my head. I
Yes.
know his contract is ending soon,
Yep.
but you can say that he does have a future elsewhere, so it wouldn't be unreasonable for him to think about like, I will play these games but I want this much raise. I've seen this proposal. Do you know what a pre-contract agreement is?
Well, I know it from is that what Naby Keita had, for example?
Describe that.
So I just like every once in a while you do see these guys sign a contract but play their season out or even play the following season with their parent club, and then upon free agency that's when they swap. But they seem to have some agreement in place already. So I think Naby Keita was playing for RB Leipzig
Yeah,
and he was signed by Liverpool. Everyone knew he was going to Liverpool, but he finished out the season and then the following season as well with Leipzig before moving over to Liverpool.
exactly. It's
Is that what you
something
mean?
like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's one option, but as with many of these suggestions, there is a few drawbacks, and the biggest one here I think is the integrity of the competition, given that
Yes.
like some of these players could face like the club they're moving to whenever this season does end
That's the
in
thing. It's
competition.
it's all very likely we could see it that all these leagues are not necessarily in sync for another year or two. Who knows? Because you obviously have different leagues already starting at various times. Like even the Scandinavian leagues play in the summer. However, now you could have a situation where various leagues are all starting and restarting at different times. So a player might be less inclined or maybe more inclined to go to a country if a league is running or whatnot. So who knows?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's good now to take a break on. Who knows? All these incredibly complicated
It will be interesting to
discussions.
follow. I mean, we're going to be setting precedent in the football world just through this whole situation. I'm sure a lot of contracts will be rewritten pandemic clauses or various things. Who knows, right? It's
Yeah,
going to be very
truly,
interesting
like
to
force
follow.
majeure clauses are
Yeah.
about to really get ready to see all insurance premiums go
Yeah.
up everywhere across the board.
Across the board, indeed. Yeah.
Wonderful. With that, let's take a quick break and we'll be back to talk about our last two major effects of the coronavirus on football.
Welcome back, everybody. So, we've been able to discuss a few different points today about how the football world and the football communities have been affected by COVID-19 and this pandemic. The next topic that we want to discuss is the wage cut discussion. Glow, tell us what you think about this. Where is the world going as far as wage cuts?
Wow. So this topic, I think, do you ever see a topic and you just have like a visceral reaction to it? I think
So,
this is what this was for
this is
me.
for
Like,
you, hey? Yeah.
yeah, this was like a conversation that really got my blood going and just, yeah. So, to set the scene, as most of you might know, there's been players across like the top five leagues taking certain like wage cuts and furloughs. One to like keep their clubs operating, and then another reason to like donate to like keep their club operating, keep staff, non-playing staff paid, and then the other bit would be to also donate to like charities and all the key service members that are helping us through this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like Spain and Barca. In Spain, like Barcelona and Madrid have taken a certain amount of pay cut. Juve, I believe, you might have to check me on this. It's been about like 70 million given up. I'm not sure in like what form or like what the divisions are there. And then Germany, it's been more coherent and more consistent. I believe at least every club in the top league has not only received like a pay cut for players, but also like a pay cut across the board, but also like donated money to like struggling clubs.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, the English health minister, so this is the part that got my blood boiling. The English health minister, I believe, Mr. Matt Hancock, and the sports minister, Nigel Huddleston, accuse players of being greedy and out of touch for not foregoing their wages, just as their employees have furloughed less well-paid colleagues. So,
Interesting.
yeah, what are your thoughts? Are they greedy? Let's fix that.
It's it almost well. My first thought is COVID-19 pandemic aside, the discussions around high earners or the highest earners in the world, people who are in this public spotlight, that discussion's always been there. That it's a moot point whether or not there's a pandemic going on. There will always be people discussing wages and how much people earn, how ridiculous it could be. I shouldn't say it's a moot point. I mean, it's still a point to discuss in terms of how these clubs should deal with it. But I mean, a wage is a wage. It was already predetermined before this went down. So it is interesting how these guys really took like an emotional or a response of ethics with these guys.
Yeah, I think that's what was fascinating to me. So this has led. I mean, this was already going to happen, but initially on April 4th, like the Players Association and the clubs met to discuss like a 30% cut on annual payment, which at the time was 10% cut on salaries and 20% deferral when the games resumed. So, but that meeting kind of went nowhere. The meeting, I mean, it came out was at the best inconclusive, but basically there was no agreement there. So a lot of people, there was a fair amount of like outrage, and I think that this conversation is very nuanced, or at least I think the coverage I've seen in most parts, or like the comments on the internet, I thought lacked the nuance that I thought should be added. I mean, one thing, I think that players are not the only like well-earning individuals in the world.
Indeed, they're just obviously in the public spotlight as well
Yeah,
when it
like
comes to.
celebrities make just as much money, or like perhaps even more. And that being like even that, and I do understand that football is obviously couched in community, so they
Mm-hmm.
do have there's a certain like level of responsibility that comes with being part of the community, but I still think that the level of like outrage or like you are being greedy, like that kind of vibe of like you're being greedy, I thought was not necessary, especially since even before this conversation was happening, like players, like I know Marcus Rashford was like raising money in his own
Yes, he was.
community,
Yes.
like Messi was donating, like coaches like Pep Guardiola was donating to his hometown, like
Mm-hmm.
to Spain, to like Spanish medical
Didier
health
Drogba, I
services.
saw. Yeah, he opened up a hospital or something like that in his hometown in Cote
Yeah,
d'Ivoire.
so it
That's
really wasn't
interesting.
like it didn't seem to me that like there was an absolute absence of like activity. And to the other point that I was thinking about, it was in my head a bit strange to me that if players are making this much, presumably their owners are making more money. There's
Surely,
like I think about
surely.
like 80 billion amongst like
Why
Premier League
wouldn't? Why
owners.
else would they be in the line of work? Exactly.
Yeah, so it was to me that if we're like going to encourage like high earning individuals to sacrifice a little so we can all get through this, then we should like extend it not just to players but like high earning employees of from like a certain amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me, the fact that it just seemed very player specific, I'd found initially odd
They
and
do. They do
confusing.
seem to get the brunt of it, though. Hey, I mean that comes with obviously the public spotlight, social media. It can be a rampage. It is interesting, also, though. I think there's an added pressure when I'm sure folks like Mr. Hancock and Mr. Huddleston, when they see leaders like, for example, Jordan Henderson, he gets all the captains together and tries to come up with an agreement between all the club captains that they will make some financial moves to help out their communities. That's not necessarily everybody speaking like that, but as soon as one person does, or a high profile player, well, then they have some ammunition, right? Then they have something to kind of add to their point. Well, if this player is doing it, how come not all players are doing it? And there's
Yeah,
that kind
absolutely.
of shaming component comes into play.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I agree very much. Like every players for the most part, I would say want to do the right thing. I mean, it's like every part in society, right? Not everyone, like even if we're doing a group thing, not everyone wants to
Hmm.
participate, but it seems
Yeah.
like the bulk of people want to help out. And
You
the other
know,
bit, the
Sorry,
other
one,
bit,
one, one quick thing I thought about was I wonder if suddenly all the players are going to start looking at the N'Golo Kantes of the world and Jurgen Klopp. Don't they drive fairly modest cars? I think Conte was known to drive a fairly modest car, and then even Mr.
I
Klopp
love
there.
that man.
Doesn't he have a Skoda or something? So
That
he,
would make so much sense. You know what? He probably is on a bicycle, if we're being
I
honest.
serious,
Like,
I heard this. I think there's like even posts about it. Like he rolls in, everyone's got their Land Rovers and whatever else they're driving fancy cars, right? And he rolls in on his family car. I think
yeah,
Conte too would show up to practice. I gotta look it up somewhere. What he drives. I'll look
that
it
would
up.
delight. That would be delightful. Or like the Kante memes on the internet, like my
Oh, of
favorite.
course,
But
just
today,
those
not to
beautiful men.
digress, I think the other one of the other point that was brought up during this process of like a unilateral pay cut had been the fact that not all players. I think Wayne Rooney wrote an op-ed about this actually,
Hmm.
that not all players, even in the same club, do not earn the same amount of money. And like the difference between like the club captain and the person who is in contention for the Ballon d'Or versus like the academy kid who just made the first team and
Hmm.
it just joined like the wage bill, like 30% might not affect like Messi, but 30% is going to
Indeed,
affect
yeah.
whoever is down on the wage bill. So that's the other part of like a unilateral wage bill that seemed a bit like not I mean it seemed like
Well,
the
we know that the
easiest thing
wage
to do but not completely
disparities.
thought through.
Yes, we know the wage disparity is quite significant. I mean, even Sheffield United. What was it, John Ludstrom? If there's any other fantasy Premier League fans out there like Glow and I, we all know that John Ludstrom is quite a legend this year, and I think his wage is
He's
quite a
come
bit
through.
lower. Yeah. It's quite a bit lower, and I think even this week there was talks about one of the other players from Newcastle cutting his wages, but he doesn't earn as much compared to the other players too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think those were some of the things that the additional like qualifiers that I especially like was interested in knowing, and not just like raising him, just like how dare they not like cut their wages and all that kind of stuff. And the last big one, which has seen some updates since I last did this research, which had been the valid concern, in my opinion, of hey, if we're cutting our wage bill, which most players were for, where is it going? Because you'd had teams, at least in the Prem, of who had like Newcastle and Spurs and Liverpool. The latter two have since uh, changed their mind about this after protests from fans who had put their employees on the furlough scheme, the British furlough scheme, which means like the British government would pay about 80% of your wages if you're temporarily like furloughed, and then the club would pay about like 20%. So there was this concern that like, hey, we're giving you money, we kind of want to know where it's going, which like makes sense to me. Like whenever I donate, I like to pick what charity I'm giving it to, and I know what cause that I'm supporting. So that seemed like a reasonable ask to me.
It's gonna be. What do you think? I mean, isn't there an aspect of, at the end of the day, this is football. We did start off by saying that, and there are significant challenges right now in the world that are beyond football. So isn't there some sort of like moral opinion that the world is allowed to have about footballers because they play a game at the end of the day, but they're paid for it? So we're allowed to have a say in what they should earn. Is there any aspect to that?
I actually feel quite differently in this particular aspect because to me, we do like get to partake in their jobs, but I also think at the end of the day, like that's what puts food on the table. And I think there are like other people in the world who earn like similar and perhaps even more, but just because their jobs are like practiced behind office walls, like we don't get to like chirp in and say here's what you should do with your money, here's like all the opinions I think feel about you. So to some extent I think that we like as fans get to have like some opinion chipping in, but I also think this is someone's livelihood and I want to afford them the same amount of like respect and discrepancy I want my livelihood to be afforded, even though I will have tons of opinions about what they do, how they do their job.
Of course. At the end of the day, yes, it is a job, and they had the opportunity afforded to them, but they took it and they worked hard for it, and so fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, if I could, like, if I was half decent, I would like that as well. I don't think anyone who, like, loves the game or even isn't a fan of the game, like, if they could do it, they probably would.
If only I had not found FIFA, the video game, before I found a football when I was young, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, exactly. And just one quick note before we move on was somebody had brought up to me, and I really thought this was like a wonderful point that I wanted to raise about like the multiculturalism of like all the leagues, and how yes, these players like live in certain countries and they are their second homes, but just living the global world that we live in, I know I have multiple different homes. So like if I was seeing like a pandemic that's affecting everything, I think I would have liked to have like a say. I'm just like, okay, I am Spanish and English, but so I would like to participate and like give to efforts of both health services. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a good point, actually. A lot of these guys carry multiple different nationalities for sure.
Yeah, like, and I think I wouldn't see it as a questioning of loyalty. Like Pep is part Spanish, and I think it's wonderful that he is giving to like the Spanish medical services because you're still part of that country and you still owe them a lot of your upbringing.
But let's be honest, do you actually think Diego Costa would give some money back to Brazil?
Well,
He shut the door on that nationality, it seemed. My goodness.
yeah, Diego Costa is such a character, honestly.
How many goals has that guy got? I think he's actually been shocking for Atletico.
Yeah, and I think he spent most of the season out of shape or like on the bench, like or just injured. So he hasn't done too much for them, but he's always a character. I always love to see him when he gets on the pitch.
Yeah, an absolute character is the best way to put it for sure. 31 years old now. Who knew?
Damn. Alrighty. So this is the last bit that I wanted us to talk about. What do you think is going to? I think this is the last major effect that I could think of. What do you think is going to happen to the future of transfers?
I'm stumped. I mean, there's a number of ways it could go. We just finished talking about how it kind of this discussion of how is each club going to handle their own contracts with their own players, but everyone's watching each other. We know that it's the world's game. We know that agents and scouts are all over the world looking at players, and so how are we going to look at transfers and transfer windows? Are they going to do away with transfer windows for a year just to allow a more flexible opportunity for each club and each player? I don't know. What do you think is going to happen?
Um, I I think well, mostly I think a lot of this is uncertain, and it seemed like a lot of the staff that were getting furloughed for about a number of clubs were scouting. But I've also been listening to like clubs that are really using this time to look at the because to look at like the market and like any opening opportunities like clubs players at clubs whose contracts are ending. And I definitely don't think we'll see the Neymar like 196
I was
million
going to say
transfers
maybe
yet.
this will be a bit of a reset button on those inflated
Yeah, I think it will
transfer
stabilize
fees.
like the transfer market a little bit. Yeah. So I think in many ways I think that's a positive thing. But I also see that some clubs will definitely greatly suffer from like their talent and their like academies, and where can you invest if the clubs, I don't know, is for lower league clubs, for instance, is it worth like putting this much money in an academy if like a Premier League club or like La Liga is going to swoop in and take them when they're like 18 or 16, younger and younger?
I mean, that's a problem. What we're seeing right now with Sunderland is, even last season we had Josh Maja. He was an academy product, fill in the net. I think he had 20 goals or thereabouts by Christmas, and he got picked up by a Liga club in France. So what can you do?
Yeah, definitely. Well, mostly I can just like pray that Germany gets it right and we can have like some football.
Exactly. They
No,
can be the example, the model for us all to follow.
yeah, I think, yeah. Is there, did you have anything else on this player transfer situation? I think that one is more of for me, that is a wait and see. Let's
Yes.
first get a season back and then we shall see what happens to transfers.
What I am interested to know though is just some of these implications around tournaments. So, for example, I use the Champions League, but I know that for example, the Concacaf Champions League was already going on. The Copa Sudamericana, Copa Libertadores, these other tournaments that, if I understand correctly, a lot of players cannot, if they've already shown up in the tournament with one shirt, they can't switch clubs and play for another team. So it's going to be interesting to see how those competitions are affected if, especially good players transfer clubs, but they can't actually compete in that tournament anymore. That's going to be interesting to see too.
Definitely something to watch. Dan, thoughts? Let's take a quick break and have a fun and less depressing section.
Indeed, let's do it.
Welcome back, everybody. This is our fun section, but before we get to it, a quick note on to a quick asterisk because my god, the information is moving very, very fast. To clarify on what some players have been doing in the coronavirus efforts, and then we'll be back with a fun section. Dan, what did you want to note?
Well, it's been really neat to see how the football community is still alive and well, despite the lack of live football matches to watch and participate in. We are seeing lots of initiatives. And shout out to the social media, whoever's in charge of social media over at Leighton Orient, they put it out to numerous clubs. Next thing you know, I think they had it was well over 150 representatives of clubs around the world who were in the FIFA video game, and they all put together a tournament. And we saw the likes of Todd Cantwell representing Norwich. We saw other professional players representing their clubs, and then various other either FIFA Pro athletes or even fans, which was great to see. And so it was a lot of fun. I think some of these guys even put their matches up on Twitch and other streaming platforms. And so it did create a bit of that culture again, that community that everyone loves. And I think there was even some betting going on. Some of the betting websites took this over, and we've seen other clubs and leagues start similar efforts, which has been great to see.
You know what's quite funny? I'm not like super like into FIFA or very knowledgeable about it, but I did know about this, except I had it from like fictional podcast about football that I listened to.
Really?
So for some reason I was like, oh yeah, this happened in this podcast, and I completely did not connect the two dots that this is actually a real thing.
Yeah. No, it actually caught some traction. A clever name, the FIFA Quarantine tournament, and it was great. It was well set up, and the Leighton Orient Twitter, the person managing that account was really just monitoring it and posting, and it was a lot of fun to follow.
Fantastic. You'll love to see that. Okay. So for our fan section today, a little bit about this section. We will rename it. If you have name suggestions, please let us know. But for every pod, we will tend to have like a more detailed research topic, and we want to have like a fun section where we can ask random questions or go on random tangents that might be football related, but not always.
Exactly.
So today,
seeing as how we can't be together in person, we might as well have a bit of banter.
yeah. So today, for our inaugural question, here comes the age-old, just truly the question that has puzzled many philosophers for life. Would you rather be bitten by Zidane or bitten by Suarez?
Yes.
Or headbutted by Zidane? Please make your case.
Oh my gosh. Do I have to go first?
I asked the question, so I think so. I'm also buying myself a little bit of time.
Of course. So, would I rather be bitten by Luis Suarez or headbutted by Zinedine Zidane? You know what? I'm going to go with... Here's why. I'd rather be bitten by Luis Suarez, and here's why. In 2014, my wife and I bought tickets to a round of 16 match at the World Cup in Brazil, and I was so excited to attend. We didn't know, of course, who was going to be in that match. The way it worked out, it was an all South American final. It was Colombia versus Uruguay, and I was so excited I was going to be able to see the likes of James Rodriguez, Cuadrado, Cavani, Suarez was going to be there. And what does Suarez do the match before I'm going to see him? He bites someone, gets himself sent off, and I flew across the world to see him, and he's not there. So at least if I got bitten by him, I'd be close to him. I could finally see the guy and I'd give him a piece of my mind. So there we go. That's
so you're basically using this as an opportunity to chastise Suarez.
Basically, to finally get him in person and be like, "Come on, man. Like, let's talk about this. I'm really disappointed. I'm gutted you weren't there. Uruguay did not show up for the match. It was totally dominated by Colombia, which they performed very well in that tournament. But I was very disappointed.
I'm quite on the opposite. I think I would rather be headbutted by Zidane.
Okay.
For sure. Well, neither of these options are good for social distancing. There's not enough 6 feet.
Well, let's be honest.
So not likely to happen in this time period. But if things ever do return to normal, definitely prefer Zidane. Mostly, okay. I think he's such a cool and composed guy that I would like to... I mean, obviously would never beat him on the pitch, but like if I can elicit any sort of emotion in him that he thinks I'm worth headbutting, I feel like that could be kind of interesting. Just like, very few people can say that. Whereas I feel like Suarez has just like been biting people left and right.
That is hilarious. There's definitely some kind of, there's a bit more of a status in a headbutt than a bite, perhaps. Hey, Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe I
I
should
think in the
rethink mine.
on the ladder of like bad on like the ladder of like offenses to do on the pitch, some might say the headbutt reigns
Oh
supreme.
my gosh, that's hilarious. Well, hey, nothing to do with his, dashing good looks or the French connection with Zinedine Zidane there.
Not so much. Not so much actually. I don't know. I'm like curious for like such a cool and collected guy. Even though he actually had a fair amount of like red cards in his career, surprisingly.
Did he? Interesting.
Yeah, but I would just like to know that I bested him at something.
Yes. You know what's funny actually, and I think about it. In your situation, if at least you could prepare for it. At least he like faces you and headbutts you. Whereas Suarez doesn't every time he like what is it? He bit was it Chiellini? He bit Chiellini like on the shoulder when he's like not even looking. Like he comes at
Yeah,
you from behind, he sneaks up on you, and next thing you know you're getting like these fangs dug into your neck. And you're
yeah.
just like
It's slightly cowardly, don't you think? You
kind
know?
of like you can't even defend yourself. There's no chance. Whereas Zidane, like, he kind of always squares up to you. You have a chance, at least to protect yourself.
You can always go with like a head to head situation or just like, oh yeah, we're just going at it. But like a bite is just, someone
Yeah,
just took a chunk out of you.
that's right.
It's
Oh
so
man,
rare and weird. I just feel that I would need like an extra 15 minutes to process this. It's like, somebody just bit me. Like a grown man just sunk his teeth into me.
I guess to be fair, he's kind of clamped down on it, hasn't he? Has he not bit anyone since that World Cup incident?
There's a rumor that goes around that it is in his Barca contract.
Oh my word! Is that
Which,
right? Eh?
if I could, I would pay good money to get my hands on this contract.
That is funny. Well, there we go. That's the contract talk. We should have been talking about how they're going to
Yeah,
navigate his next contract.
yeah, that'd be a great topic of things we should include in an odd contract.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Dan, this brings us to the end of our inaugural pod. We hope you guys liked it, and please send us like any feedback. Thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to us. Get in touch via email. We're at asides.football@gmail.com, which is asides.football@gmail.com. We don't have an Insta or Twitter yet, but we will have one in the near future. And tell your friends and rate us on iTunes or wherever you listen.
Thanks, everyone. And of course, underlying all this, stay safe out there. Do your best despite the situation, and try your best to encourage those around you in this time.
That's it from us. Have a good one.
Thank you.